report yesterday. I would proxy as Logan. Our report name was KPMG 2. Okay, let's run this report first to see where we were. So I think we were creating our report filters, right? I'm going to quickly run this report. All right, so if I give a gender value, if I give a date, 1/1/22, it gives me an output based on the prompt values I select. Okay, let's see what happens when we run this report without any input, right? So I'll leave this blank. Okay, I've left the prompt selection blank. And now when I run this report, it doesn't give me any data, right? Now, if you remember, we looked at Workday standard reports yesterday. Let me bring it up again. And so what are the options if I want to fetch all standard reports across all the report categories? So I want to run this report and get data for all the report categories. How can I do that? Any guesses?
Could you just look up Workday standard reports for a list of all the reports available?
Yes. So what I'm saying is now this is my report. And basically, when I run this report, I want a list of all the reports in the system across all report categories. So how do I get that output? There are a couple of ways, right? And we discussed those yesterday. So the first is I select all the report categories in the prompt selection. And when I do that and then run this report, it gives me all the standard reports across all of these 225 odd report categories. And there are some 5,000 odd reports, right? Across.
Ravi, I have a quick question. How did you select all of them? I didn't see how you did that.
You do Control A and then enter.
Okay. So you can use the Control A shortcut.
Yes.
Is there any other way, or?
Yeah. We can use Control A. I use that.
Okay. That's what I would use too. Okay, good to know. Thank you.
So now when I select all the selections, it gives me all the standard reports. But if you remember, yesterday I said there's another option. So what I can also do is I can basically leave my selection blank. So instead of selecting everything, I can just leave my selection blank. This is exactly what we did here, right? We ran this report without any prompts. But the difference is when I run this report without any input in the prompt, it gives me full data. Whereas when I run the other report without any input, it gives me basically blank data. Now, the reason for that is the way the filters have been configured. So yesterday when we spoke about filters, we looked at a couple of different options, right? We progressively improved on our filter. All right, so the last option that we selected was prompt the user for value. And it's because of that we are able to input the values. But then there's one more option. So if I go ahead and edit the report now, okay, finally. So we go to filter and look at the available options under. Okay, so if I go to filter, okay, so we've looked at all three of these options yesterday, right? We saw the option value from another field, value specified in this filter, and the current option we have enabled is prompt the user for category called common, and look at the second option, and the option says prompt the user for value, and if the value is blank, ignore the filter condition. So basically when I select this option, it makes my prompt optional, right? So if we enter some value for report will be data. However, if we leave the value blank when running the report, then system will filter criteria doesn't exist, right? And that's what I'm going to select for my second option as well. I'm going to all prompt the user for value. Goodness, this is very slow. Okay, so once again, okay, so once again, I'll make sure that both the prompt selections are non-unique. I'll go back here and I'll select the same option here. Okay, this time when I run this report, all right, let's see what happens if we leave this blank. So this time when I run this report without any input, it is in fact giving me all the records. Make sense? So basically there are 4 comparison types that we can use. The first one is prompt the user for value. The next is prompt the user for value. And if the value is blank, then ignore the filter condition. And then there are 2 modes, value specified in this filter and value from another field. Make sense? Any questions? Now let's try one more option. So what I want is I want to change my data source. So we know that at any point in time, we can go ahead and select a different data source. The data source could be a standard data source, or it could be an index data source, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to select a data source called workers by organization. So
what do those little icons mean? Like, does that tell you index?
So this identifies that this is a standard data source, and that bolt icon, this identifies that this is an index data source.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm selecting a different data source, which is called workers by organization. Let's take any one of these, doesn't matter. And that's all I'm doing. Let's go ahead and run this report now. When I do that, if you see, there are some additional options in the prompt. Now, these are the ones that we added: gender, starting hire date, ending hire date. But then there are 3 extra options. In fact, one of these is required. So when I submit, if I don't enter a value here, system gives me an error. So where are these prompts coming from? So these prompts are coming from the data source. So some data sources, they come with inbuilt prompts. So because the data source says workers by organizations, what it allows me to do is specify an organization, and then it will get you output for those organizations. And how can I check that? If I go to the related actions, the data source description would specify what are the built-in prompts. So this data source comes with 3 built-in prompts. Now we cannot go ahead and delete these prompts, right? However, we can go ahead and manage them. And how do we do that? There's a tab called prompts. So I can click on this prompts, and then I can click on this checkbox, which is populate undefined prompt defaults. And when I do that, system populates all the prompts on my report. Now this include both the inbuilt prompts, which are coming from the data source, as well as those prompts that you have added as part of your report filters. Now here I have a few different options. What I can do is I can relabel some of these prompts, right? So I want to relabel this as start date, right? Or end date. So the first option is I can go ahead and relabel these prompts. Second, I can go ahead and manage prompt defaults. Now, if you see, the problem is there are 5 prompts, and every time the end user runs this report, they'll have to manually enter the data, right? So instead of what we can do is we can provide our end users some default options. So for ending hire date, I want to specify a default option of, let's say, today. Starting hire date, I want to specify a default of maybe 1st of Jan 22. Similarly, we can also specify defaults for the inbuilt prompts. So for organizations, I'm saying again, specify default value. And I'm going to default some GMS companies. So I'm saying global modern services. Netherlands, Norway, Thailand. Okay, I'm saying specify default. So these are basically Boolean fields. What are Booleans? Yes or no. So it is only thing that it is asking us is, do you want to include a manager? So the default would be either yes or no. So in Workday, a checkbox means yes. And if you leave it blank, it means no, right? Similarly, do you want to include subordinate organizations? And I'm saying yes as a default. So let's see what happens now when we run this report. And similarly for gender, I'm saying specify default of male and female. So this time when we run this report, it will the report will be presented with those defaults. But as the end user, I always have the option to add something, to delete something. So for example, I want to change this to 2000, right? Maybe I don't need this. I can always go ahead and add extra stuff. And I can go ahead and run this report. Right? So the advantage is I'm presented with those default values so that I don't have to enter it every time. Okay, the problem with the default that I've selected, at least for example with the date, once again, is the static value. We would want that value to be determined dynamically. And we can go ahead and do that. So for example, date was 2020, some static value that we selected. So once again, I can make these prompts dynamic. So editing my report, I'll go back to prompts. All right. Okay. Now, no matter who runs this report and when this report is run, if you see the ending date would always be prompted or defaulted to November 29th. Once again, I want this to be today's date whenever the report is being run. So instead of saying specify default value, so the default option was no default value, right? This is how it looked earlier. I changed it to specify default value and then I selected a static date. But then that is not what I want. I want the date to be determined dynamically. So I'm saying determine default value at runtime and I'll select the option today. This is exactly what we did with our filter yesterday, right? So I'm saying the ending date should be defaulted to today's date. And maybe the starting date should be today minus, let's say 1 year, right? Or 6 months or anything. Now for that, so today is a workday delivered field, right? But let's say I want to default starting date to be today minus 7 days. Now workday has not delivered any such field. Now in those cases, we create something called calculated fields. We'll not create one now, right? At least we'll start with some simpler calc fields and we'll talk about how this particular calc field is created. For now, I'll select one of the available calculated fields. And there are quite a few that people have created. So if I go to today, if you see people have created all sorts of calc fields. So let's say I select this one, today minus 1 year. So this time when I run my report, my end date is defaulted to today and my start date is defaulted to today minus 1 year. All right. Okay. There are a few other options for managing the prompts. Let's go ahead and check that. All right. Okay. So organizations, it's a required prompt. Now, because this is a built-in prompt, I cannot make any changes to it. So for example, I cannot make it optional. If I do that, system would give me an error saying, because this is a built-in prompt, it must be required. Right? So I cannot make a prompt which is required through the data source optional. But then some of the optional prompts that I have added, I can make them required. So for example, I want gender to be a required prompt. Right? Similarly, maybe I want these two dates to be required. So I can make any optional prompt required and vice versa, at least for these ones. Second, these two prompts include managers. I don't want to display these prompts to the end user. So again, we cannot delete them, but we can hide them. So I'm selecting this checkbox, do not prompt at runtime in include managers section. Okay, let's see what happens. So now when I run my report, these are now marked as required. And if you see include managers is no longer displayed. But when the report is run, system would still get me data for all managers because we have enabled include managers checkbox. It's just that we are not displaying it to the end user. There's no data for 1 year. So I'm running it from 2000 and there would be data. Okay, now whenever we run this report, if you see, it shows me the selection with which the report was run. It shows me the start date criteria is X, Y, include subordinate is checked, gender is this, and so on and so forth. Again, if we want, we can hide this. So what we can do is I can go ahead and edit my report. Go back to my prompts. So I do not want this to be displayed on the report output, and I can say do not include in subtitle. If we do not want to include any one of these in the subtitle, then we can explicitly select checkbox for all of them, or we can simply uncheck this box. So display prompt values in subtitle. So when this checkbox is enabled, and this is enabled by default, the prompt values are displayed in the report output. If I uncheck this, none would be displayed. Or I can selectively say if a given value should be displayed or not. So again, this time when I run, right, that organizations is no longer displayed. Though system is giving me output for that selection. It's just that it's not displayed on the output. All right. Okay, so that was prompts. We'll come back and take a look at that calculated field later. For now, let's start with some of the simpler calculated fields. Or before that, let me talk about share tab. Now, when the report is created, it's owned by the person who creates it. So because I created it as Logan McNeil, the report owner is Logan McNeil. And the default setting is the report is not shared with anyone. So at this point in time, I can share this report with all the authorized users, or I can selectively share this report with either specific groups and or users. So for example, I want to share, let's say, this report with a single user, Betty Liu, right? And I can go ahead and select that user or those users. Or in addition to this, I can also share this report with specific security groups. So for example, I can share this report with managers, HR partners, HR administrators, or any relevant security group, right? So now when these security groups, they search with the report name, they'll be able to access this report. Or alternatively, we can make this report available in their homepage, and we'll see how that is done. Right? So we'll talk about dashboards at the end of the class, and we'll see how that is enabled on the homepage. Okay, so that is sharing the report. Now let's go back to the columns. So all the columns that we have added till now, all the fields that we have added till now, they were all Workday delivered fields. What I actually want is to add some calculated fields. Okay, now why would you add or when would you create a calculated field? When Workday doesn't give us a standard field to take care of that requirement. An example is, so for example, is here, wherein we don't have a field called today minus 1 year, right? And that's why we have created a calc field. Okay, so stuck again. So here we have, for example, age, right? And this gives me the age of the employee as of today. When I'm running this report, the current age of the employee. Let's say we have a requirement. Can you get me the age of the employee as of when they joined the organization? So if my hire date is 2000, right? And what was my age when, or as of 2000, right? And this is some hypothetical requirement. Okay, so what I need is the age of the employee as of when they joined my firm. Now there's no Workday delivered field for this. So we'll have to create a calculated field. Now there are a couple of ways in which calculated field is created. One option is I can create tenant-wise calculated field, a tenant-wide calculated field. What do I mean by tenant-wide calculated field? That calc would be available and would be accessible by any other reports as well. So if tomorrow I create a new report and I have the same requirement, I can simply search for that calculated field and add it to that report. The other option is I can create report specific calculated fields. and that calc field would only be available in the report for which it is created. The way both these calc fields are created are exactly the same, right? With just a difference in the task. So if I want to create a calc field for the entire tenant, I would go to the task, create calculated field. Right? Okay. If I want to create a calculated field specific for my report, I'll come to my report and say create calculated field for report. If you see, the options are exactly the same. The only difference is the business object is defaulted. So for creating a calculated field, business object is a required field. So what is the significance of a business object? So yesterday when we were speaking about the object model, we said a business object is a collection of attributes, or every business object has attributes. So worker has last name, first name, gender, age. Each of these attributes is a field which is available or associated with that business object, right? So now when I'm creating a new field, I'm defining a new attribute. I'm defining a new attribute for a specific business object. In this case, a worker, right? So I'm trying to find the age of the worker as of the date the worker was hired. So whenever we create a calculated field, for that, we specify the business object on which that calc field is being created. And once you do that, the field gets added to that business object. So that's why if you remember when we were looking at the business object details report, worker had some 15,000 odd fields, right? Of course, this is a test tenant, so people have created all sorts of calculations. So when we create calculated field from the context of the report, Workday knows that this report is related to worker, and that's why it defaults worker as the business object, or it will default any business object for which associated with the report for which the calc field is being created. Okay, the next thing is the function. Now, similar to how we create or do calculations in an Excel, and there are different functions available, sum and divide and substring. Similarly, for creating calculated fields, there are different functions available. So the functions determine what would that calculated field do, or how would that calc field process data to give you the output. Okay, now if I look at my requirement, all we need to do is we need to take the date of birth of the employee, right? 1/1/1960, for example. The employee's hire date is 2000. So that means as of hire date, the employee's age was 40, right? So simply put, all I need to do is subtract employee's hire date, date of birth from his or her hire date. So we simply need to subtract one date from another date. Okay, which means the function that I would use is date difference. So all you need to do is, if you go in here, it lists out all the functions, but if you simply search for date, you'll see there are quite a few date related functions. We'll look at some of these functions in the context of advanced reports. A few functions we would talk in terms of matrix reports that we'll see later. A few other functions are related to composite reports, which we will not cover. Okay, so the function that I'm using is date difference because I want to find the difference between two dates. Okay, naming the recommended naming convention, the best practice, something that I have followed is start your calc field with CF, followed by the function. So the function is date difference, followed by the business object on which the calc field is created, and then a short description of what that calc field does, right, or derives. So the advantage is anyone who's looking at that calc field would get a sense of what that calc field does and will not have to look into the details, or they'll at least get the context of the calc field from the name itself, right? Again, Workday doesn't enforce any naming convention, but this is best practice. I'll go to OK. Based on the function that you select, Workday gives you the right screens. So because your function is date difference, it is giving you options to select two dates. Now here you can select the ending date, and this is the starting date which has to be subtracted from the ending date. So my bigger date, my ending date is higher date. Right? And I want to subtract employees' date of birth from it. And I want to find the difference in terms of years or months or days or hours or any of these values. Okay, let's select months first. So there's this checkbox, best practice, good practice. Whenever this checkbox is enabled, go ahead and select it. So this is kind of your exception handling mechanism in Workday. So for example, if for a given worker, let's say their date of birth is not entered, it's blank. Now when Workday or this calculation tries subtracting a date from a blank date, it will error out and your entire report will throw an error. When this checkbox is selected, if for a given instance there is an error because data is incorrect, then your whole report will not go into error. That particular instance, this calculation will give a 0 value, right? So wherever this option is enabled or available, and it's available in a lot of arithmetic calculated fields, right? Best practice, be on the safe side and go ahead and check this. Okay, so I've created a calc field. It finds the difference between two dates, right, in terms of months. Let's quickly run this. What I'll do is we no longer need these filters. So I'll go ahead and remove them for now. Right, that way will be, and I'll also change the data source so that we get all records. Okay, if I go in here now and try saving, system would give me an error. The reason is these prompts are no longer relevant because I've changed the data source. I would have to remove these prompts. They were associated with the data source that I had selected earlier. If I still save it, it will give me an error because again, I've removed higher dates from my filter. Because this is removed from the filter, I'll have to remove them from prompts as well. Okay, let's run this now. It is giving me the difference in terms of months, right? Difference between the date of birth and hire date. Anytime I go ahead and make changes to the calc field, it would automatically reflect on the report. All right. Next, though this technical name looked fine, but for an end user, this wouldn't make any sense. So I would also want to relabel my this particular field on the report, right? So first thing, let's go ahead and update our calculated field so that it gives us the difference in terms of years. I'll come in here. I'll go ahead and update my calc field. And I'll say, get me the difference in terms of years. And now when I refresh my report, the difference is in terms of years, right? So 95 to 2000, and it only gives you whole numbers. It doesn't give you those fractions. So the person was hired when he was 4 years old. Okay, so calc field is updated. Well, you don't have to make any changes to your report. It would automatically reflect. I would now go ahead and relabel the field on my report.
Hey, Ravi, this is slightly unrelated, but when you're working with prompts and you're setting values, like for the gender one, is there a way to set it to null? Like to search where like the gender is null and they don't have one saved?
So you want all employees whose gender is empty, not.
Yeah, is there, because I know there's a way to filter for it, but I didn't know if if there was a way to do it in the prompt and not just set it in the filter.
No, in the prompts, it will only allow you to select values based on. So what are you trying to do in prompts? You are letting users select the value, right?
Yeah, how instead of selecting female or male, could you select like no?
Right. So you cannot give an option to an end user to select blank, right? That's technically not possible. So in prompts, that cannot be done. In terms
but you
of
can
filters,
still do it in
you can
filter.
say, yeah.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I can come in here and just relabel this column so that it's more meaningful to the end user who's running this report. All right, there are a few other calculated fields that we can create. I want to add one more calc field. I'll come in here, create calc field for report. Search for date. Okay, the next calc field I want to create is bill date. CF date worker, and I'm just creating a random calc field. Okay, so what is bill date? A date has 3 components, right? Month, year, and day. Now this calc field allows us to build a date by selecting those components. So for each of those components, it allows you to specify whether that component would be a static number or you want to extract that component from some other value. So for example, year, maybe I want year to be a static number, 2099 or some number. So I can select a static number, right? Okay, let me select 2066. Okay, now this number doesn't exist. So when I search for 2099, that was also a calculated field. So in terms of reports, numbers don't exist. You'll have to create those numbers as well. And how do we create them? We create them as a calculated field of type numeric constant. And if you see, we can also use nested calculated fields. So I'm building this calc field, and within that calc field, I'm using another calc field, right? So you can nest a calc field to any level. So now I don't have 2066, which means I want to create a new calc field. But these type of constant calc fields, usually we don't create for a specific report because they are relevant globally, right? Any report may use this number 2066. So I'll go ahead and create a global calc field, and this way you'll also see how this calc field is created. Again, exactly similar to your report specific calc fields. Now there are three types of constants. We can create numeric constant, a number. We can create date constant, again a static date, or I can also create a text constant. We'll see text constant and also date constant later, but these are just that, a constant value. So here I want to create a numeric constant. The other thing that we do when creating constants is we create them on a globe, on a business object called global. So any calc field or any field which is available on the global business object is accessible by any of your reports globally, right? Irrespective of the primary business object of that report. So those fields that you create on the global business object can be accessed by any report throughout the tenant. The other thing that we do with respect to these constants is we give them the same name as the constant value itself. So if I, for example, name this as, let's say CF and global and numeric, then no one would actually search for that, right? It wouldn't make sense. So usually when we are creating these constant values, the name is, we give it the same name as the value itself. So once again, this is just the name. The actual value is this, right? So now when I search for 2066, it is available. Okay, that's fine. That was a static value that I've added. But with respect to month and year, day, I want it to be extracted from another field. In this case, let's say I want to extract it from the hire date of the employee. So I want to check what is the hire date of the employee and then check the month. And I want that month to be the month used for this bill date, right? And for the day, let's say I want to use the date of birth. I'll go ahead and select this and okay. Okay, so my year is constant, 2066. The month is, what did we say the month is? Okay, the month is extracted from the hire date. So the hire date is January 1st, 2000. So the month is 01. And the day is extracted from the date of birth, and that's what we get. So the day is being extracted from date of birth, And if I scroll down, we had 10 somewhere, right? The month is extracted from hire date, right? So we can use these to go ahead and create our bill dates. Okay, the next date related function that I want to create is the today minus 6 months, right? The calc field that we saw. So okay. Okay, so let's go to our prompt. Okay, let me add it here because we have already removed the prompt. So I want to create a new calc field here. Calc field for the report. And this time the function that I'm selecting is increment or decrement date. So if you see, all we are doing is we are taking today as an example, and from that we decremented 6 months to get that today minus 6 months value, right? So that's all we are doing with that calc field. Worker or I'll not do today minus 6 months. What I'll do is I'll do bill date minus 6 months or 1 year. So again, we can do nested calculated fields. So earlier I created that calc field. We built that date. So now I can come in here and take that date field, or for that matter, I can take any field. So for example, I can take hire date, and maybe we want to send a birthday wish or a gift to our employees, maybe 15 days before their hire date, right? So that it gets delivered. I can create a calc field, hire date minus 15 day, or date of birth minus 15 days. The report picks it up, and maybe we can then do the follow process. So it could be any standard field, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the calculated field that we created. Right? So now if you see, we have 3 levels of nested calc fields. So this calc field that I'm creating makes use of this calc field, which in turn uses a few number constants, the calc fields we created. You can nest or create any level of nested calculated fields. So in this, to this date, I can add or subtract X number of years. I can add or subtract X number of months, X number of days. So if I take a positive number, it gets added. If I take a negative number, oh, okay. So if I take a positive number, number would get added to this date. If I take a negative number, it would be subtracted. How do we create those negative numbers? Again, with number constant. Okay.
Do you have to create
Right.
separate numbers for the positive and for the negative value?
Yes, we have. So if you see, there's 1 and then -1, right? And if that is not available, you would have to create a separate negative number using your number constant. All right, this would take forever. Okay, and then you can use a combination. So maybe you want to add 1 day and 1 year, and from there you want to subtract 1 day or 5 days, right? So you can use all type of combinations here. Right, and so you can use any or all of these combinations. Once again, this is available. I'll go ahead and select that. So now when I save this and say okay, right? So it is adding 1 year. Okay, so those were a few date related calc fields. There are a few more and we'll talk about them. But now let's talk about instance related calc fields. Okay, so yesterday when we were talking about instances, we said there are 2 types of instances, single instance, multiple instance. So let me go ahead and add some multi instances or uh, fields to our report. Okay, while this loads. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a few position related fields. A worker, if you see, can have, when a worker is hired on a position, that position becomes the primary position of the worker. So every worker would have one primary position. Now, in addition to this, a worker may have any additional positions as well. So if I'm doing any additional job, I'll have additional positions. Now, those additional positions could be for a domestic assignment, but it could also be for an international assignment I am on, right? So I could be based in UK, but then I could go for a short-term international assignment for US. So my India position or UK position is still intact and I'm not terminated from there. I'm just added to an additional position. So when I search for positions here, you'll see there are a few position related. I'll remove that for now. You'll see there are a few position related fields. The first one is the single instance. And if I go to the details, it says the worker's primary position. So every worker would have a minimum, a maximum of one primary position. In addition to that, the worker may have many additional jobs. There's this calc field, not calc field, there's this delivered field. If you see, this is a multi-instance field. And if I go to the details, it shows all the positions or jobs for the worker. So it shows both primary as well as any additional jobs. So this will only have primary job. This will show both primary as well as additional jobs. And then there is a third field as well, which will only show additional jobs. Okay, now, because there are very few employees who have additional jobs, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and add this to our filter. This would ensure that only relevant data is pulled, right? So I want all those workers whose additional jobs is not empty, right? Or empty based on whatever you need. I'll say only fetch me those employees whose additional jobs or this calc field is not empty. Let's go to the prompt and remove our prompts. Right? Okay, so for Gail Bradley, her primary position is program manager. But then she also has one additional job. Now, additional jobs are indicated with this plus icon. Plus, if that additional job is an international assignment, Workday also shows this suffix of IA. So her additional job is actually an international assignment. And if you go to the details, you can, or if you go to the worker profile, you'll see the profile a bit different. Again, not relevant for reporting. Just want to quickly show that. So it shows me this icon, which means that this worker is doing multiple jobs. This is showing her international assignment position, wherein she's assigned to this supervisory org. But if I come in here, this is her primary job. And when I select it, my layout refreshes. So as part of her primary job, she's assigned to this position. Okay, so this is how the layout looks. Again, not relevant for reporting. But okay, now, as I mentioned, the additional job could either be an international assignment or it could be a domestic assignment. So for this worker, her additional job is not an international assignment, and that's why I don't see that IA as a suffix. Right? Okay, now what I actually want is this field has all additional jobs, both IA as well as non-IA. Right? What I want is I want to create a new field which will only show those employees and who have an international assignment position. So that field would only fetch me international assignment positions of the employee. Obviously, some employees have multiple international assignments. Again, this doesn't happen in practice, as far as I know, but this is a test tenant, right? So what I want to do is I want to create a new calc field, right, which will only fetch me those additional jobs which are related to a worker's international assignment. As per the data here, I can see a worker can have multiple international assignments. So the calc field that I would have to create would have to fetch me all those multi instances of international assignments, right? So for that, the calc field would be called extract multi instance. So that's the function. So it would extract the multiple instances of international assignments that the worker is assigned to. Now, what if a worker is not assigned to any international assignment? For example, this worker, uh, right, doesn't have an international assignment. Then it will not fetch any data. If you remember our discussion, a multi-instance can have 0 records, 1 record, or multiple instances. Okay, so the calc field I'm creating is extract multi-instance. Right? So my function is EMI. EMI stands for extract multi-instance. CF, EMI, worker, and I'm calling it IA jobs. I want to extract multiple instances from the additional jobs, right? So that's why my source field from which I want to extract multiple instances is additional jobs, right? Now from these additional jobs, I only want to extract those instances which are related to international assignment. So multi-instances would be extracted based on the condition that I specify here. Now this condition, if it is workday delivered, which is a field of type Boolean, if you remember, we discussed yesterday, then that's fine. Else we'll have to create a calc field. The calc field would be of type true false. So here there is a workday delivered field. So I'm going to use that, but we'll also create that true false condition. So if you see, there's this workday delivered field, which is Boolean, which means it will either return true or false. So if that function or that instance is associated with employee's international assignment, then this will return true. If true is returned for a specific instance, that instance is included in this field that we are creating, right? If the instance returns false, all instances within the additional jobs are evaluated based on this condition. Only those instances are included in this field which satisfy this condition. So now when I run this report, all right, this worker has only one additional job, and that is international assignment. So that's pulled. One additional job, not an international assignment, so blank. Same is the case here and here. Two additional jobs, none of them are international assignment, so nothing is pulled. International assignment, again, one job, international assignment, for this worker, 3 additional jobs, all of them international assignment, and all of them are pulled, right? So a multi-instance field can have 0 instances, 1 instances, or many instances. Okay. Um, all right. So there's another calculated field function which is called ESI, extract single instance, which is similar to EMI, but with some additional configuration options. We created a multi-instance field. Now, what I want to do is I want to add a single instance field. So for that, let me edit the report. Um, okay, so I'll remove these now. We don't need them. So a worker can be associated with multiple organizations, right? Each worker would have uh, at least a supervisory org, company, cost center, maybe a location. So these are the minimum set of organizations that a worker would be assigned to. So that's why assigned organizations is a multi-instance field. We'll first run this. We'll see the output, and then we'll create a calc field. Okay, so this worker is assigned to 3 organizations. This, I believe, is a region. This is the company that the person is assigned to, and this, I think, is the supervisory org. This is the cost center, right? So it shows all org assignments for the worker. Now what I want is, out of all these organization assignments, I want maybe the company that the person is assigned to, right? Or maybe the location or region. So I only want that instance of organization assignment, which is of type uh, company. Now, there is a separate field for company, but I'm just creating this calc field to show you how we build an ESI. I'm going to edit this report. And I would add a new field and select the option create calc field for report. The field function is ESI, extract single instance, CF, ESI, worker, assigned company. Okay, my source field is organization assignments. Right? The same logic. So out of all these instances, we want to identify a single instance. Right? And how would we do that? Based on the condition. Now, when we created our EMI, we took a available condition, right? This time we'll create a condition for ourselves. Now we know that a condition is a field of type Boolean, true and false, right? What I'll do is I would come in here. Now, one thing to remember, whenever we are creating conditions, right, we have to create that condition on this business object, right? So if you see this source field, so where is this business object coming from? If it comes from the source field that we selected. So org assignments, this field basically identifies all the organizations that the worker is associated to. So this field actually links worker with the organizations that the worker is assigned to. So the related business object is coming from the source field that we have selected. If so, the condition has to be built on the related business object. If we create it on the primary business object worker, then that cannot be pulled in here. So if I see what fields are already available, you'll see they would be associated with organizations or related BOs, right? So only those fields which are built on the organization business object can be fetched here. So I'll come in here, create calc field for report. So I'm creating one more calc field. This time the function is true false. So all conditions are of type true false, which is basically Boolean. Now the layout of this calc field is similar to how we create our filters. So what is a filter? A filter also evaluates certain condition, the report filter, and it returns either true or false value. Now that's exactly what this calc field is also doing. Now I want to check whether the organization type is company, right? That's what I want to check. So I want to check whether the type of the organization, if I go to the details, it returns me the type of the organization that is being evaluated. And I'll say any in the selection list. It shows me all organization types. What I want is company. And OK. So once again, the same logic applies. System checks each instance which is part of this source field and determines if for that instance this condition is true or not. If the condition is true, that instance is included in this field that we have created. Now in ESI, if you see, there are some additional fields as well. Now the reason for this is this field can ultimately hold only one instance, right? Now, if based on your oh, what happened? Okay, I'll have to create it again. Okay, now ultimately this calc field can only hold one instance. That's because this is of type ESI. Now what if based on your condition the field returns more than one values? Now that is not the case in our scenario, because every employee would have only one company assignment, right? You cannot be assigned to more than one company at a given time. So that is not a concern for us in this scenario. But let's say I am building a calc field for that IA, international assignments. We had earlier created an EMI for that, right? Let's say this time I want to build a an ESI extract single instance, right? To get the latest international assignment for an employee, right? So I want to create an ESI to get the latest international assignment for a worker. Now, if I build a condition saying that get me all additional jobs which are related to international assignment, then for some worker, at least one or two, the, the workers have more than one international assignments, right? So based on that condition, more than one instances would be returned. So for example, here, right? So let's say I'm building a calc field for this, which is, what was that? Additional jobs. Right? Now my condition has to be built on this. If I save this, this will give me an error. We know that there is an existing condition. So this condition is built on position or position. Okay, now based on this condition, if you see at least for this worker, system would return more than one instances. Now when that happens, because ultimately this field can only hold one instance, Workday would randomly select one of those international assignment positions and it will present it to you, right? So this sort function and these fields allow you to specify a specific instance that you want to be picked. So in my case, the requirement is get the latest international assignment position, right? So I want to sort the international assignments based on, let's say, their effective date. Do we have, so we don't have an effective date, right? At times it becomes tricky to see how you want to sort the data. So we'll see what is relevant. Okay, nothing looks relevant. Uh, Availability date. Decreasing order. Contract ended, not relevant. So usually for these, we have a date field. Okay. All right, I cannot find. Returns the value, not relevant. Earliest date. Mm-hmm. Can I search for fill date? Current position filled effective date. Okay, this is what we need, right? Because when we go on an international assignment, we fill a position and we want to sort the international assignments based on that, based on when those positions were filled. Let's see which one of these is relevant. This is calc field, the last fill date for the given position. Now this is what we want. So what I want is for all the international assignments which are returned, I want to sort those instances based on when they were filled. I want to sort them in descending order and then pick the first occurrence, right? So this way I get the latest international assignment of the employee if that's what I need, right? So out of multiple international assignments, I want the one which is the latest. So I'll sort my instances in descending order, right? Based on when the associated position was filled. And then I am going to pick the first occurrence, or based on the requirement, I could have picked last occurrence, or I could have picked a specific occurrence. Maybe I want to pick the second last international assignment, and I'll say, okay, pick the second last instance, right? So this is relevant when your your condition may return multiple instances. Now, in our case, right, we know that a person can only have one company. So in that case, what we usually do is because we know that this will only return one company and sort field is required, we say is true. So this always returns a value of true, right? This is a Workday delivered field which always returns true value. So we're saying just sort it on any basis, right? And this again doesn't matter. So in our case, these wouldn't matter, but you would come across requirements wherein there could be multiple instances and you want to sort the instances in order to pick a specific instance. Okay, so now when I run this report, it only gives me those organization assignments which are company. Any questions? Okay, so we'll talk about calculated fields, but I think we have covered quite a few today. So what I'll do is for the rest of the day, I'll pick a easier topic. So we'll talk about dashboards. Now, what is a dashboard? A dashboard is a collection of reports. So if you remember, we executed this dashboard the other day. So if I come to talent management dashboard or any of these dashboards, a dashboard is a collection of reports. Now, in the context of the dashboard, the included reports are called worklets. So what is a worklet? A worklet is simply a report that has been enabled uh, to be included on a dashboard, to be added to a custom landing page. Okay, so each one of these that you see here is a report or a worklet. Now, how do we enable a report to be added on a dashboard? Okay, in order to do that, we'll have to edit our report. Right? Come to output, and here I'll have to enable my report as a worklet. Once we enable it, system defaults my report on these two dashboards. So ultimately, if you remember, we had this discussion, or you would have had this discussion as part of your basic training last week. This home landing page, this is also a dashboard. So you can directly add reports to your home landing page, right? So what you see here, view all apps, which is basically this. This is also a dashboard, right? So I can directly enable my report to be available on the home landing page, or for that matter, any of the dashboards. Those could be custom dashboards, or those could be Workday delivered dashboards. So talent management, the dashboard which we just saw, it is a Workday delivered dashboard, and I can add my report to that dashboard. Right? Okay, when a report is run on a dashboard, if that report has multiple rows, we don't want to display all the rows because the real estate is restricted, right? So here we have an option to show maximum number of rows. So in the dashboard, system would only show these number of rows, and then we have the option to click on view more, and that's when it gives us the full details. If there are more than X number of rows, system doesn't show them. And if you see, we have this view more option, right? So this is configurable. I can say, okay, show X number of rows. All right, so now I can enable this on an already available dashboard. I'll do that. But in addition to this, I also want to create a dashboard, right? Now the task for that is create dashboard. So I can go ahead and create a new custom dashboard. I'm calling it KPMG2, right? Okay. All right. The next is the dashboard icon. So the options that you see. So these are basically the icons that you see when you right? These are those icons. And they are again all Workday delivered. So you can pick from one of the available icons, right? So I'll select employee because this is employee related. Now a dashboard can have a maximum of 6 worklets. So each dashboard on a given tab can allow a maximum of 6 worklets. That is what is defaulted here. If I want, I can select a lower value, right? So I cannot go beyond 6 because the maximum is 6. Okay, and finally domains. I will not talk about, I think not, this should have been covered as part of your training last week, security, but still uh, access to any object in Workday is controlled by the domains in which the object is included, right? So a domain is a collection of related objects. Those objects could be tasks, those objects could be reports. So for example, if I want to access the task called create supervisory organization, I should have access to the domain in which that task is included. So all tasks, all reports, all dashboards are part of different domains. And if I have access to that domain, I'll be able to access the included objects. Now, when I'm creating this dashboard, I'll have to specify in which domain I want to include this dashboard, right? And that would depend on who should have access to this dashboard. So for example, there are lots of worker data domains. And I will select the domain based on who should have that access, right? And what data I'm showing as part of this dashboard. So what kind of reports will be included as part of this dashboard. So I'm selecting a random domain because for us, it doesn't matter. Right? So I'm selecting this domain. So again, any security groups, because I'm including this dashboard in this domain, any security groups who have access to this domain would be able to access this dashboard, right? Will not go in details because that's not relevant for security. So the idea is any security groups. So this domain gives you access to information about workers and so on and so forth. And if you see, these are the security groups, which means they have view access to this domain, which means all objects within this domain, they can actually view, right? So each domain, once again, is a collection of objects. If I want to see this domain, it is a collection of these 17 objects. So if I click on them, it will show me what objects they include. So this domain actually includes these reports. So if you need access to this report, which is directory by location, you should have access to this domain, right? So that's how Workday security is structured. Again, will not go in details. It is a very big topic in itself, and I believe this would have been covered for you already. So any which ways, so all I need to know as part of dashboard is that when we are creating them, we'll have to specify in which domain we are including that dashboard. And I'll go ahead and save it. So my new dashboard is created. This is the icon I have selected, which means I can now go to my and I can say, okay, now this particular worklet that I have enabled would also be available on this dashboard. At this point in time, we have just said that this worklet is available for these dashboards, but we have not added it yet. So the next step is go ahead and configure these dashboards. And the task for doing that is maintain dashboards. So this task or this report will show us all the dashboards in the system, both custom as well as delivered. Now, with respect to custom dashboards, we can go ahead and delete them, right? So we can go ahead and delete custom dashboards. We can go ahead and edit them, or we can go ahead and run them. With respect to standard dashboards, if we have access, we can go ahead and run them, right? We can edit those dashboards, but will not be able to delete any standard dashboards, right? Okay, the dashboard I'm interested in right now is KPMG2. I'll go ahead and filter it. And once again, I have those options available. I'll click on edit. I can go back to the settings and make changes to the settings that I defined earlier when I created this dashboard. But that's fine. I don't want to make any changes right now. I'll go back to the content. So at this point in time, no content is added. Okay, I'll click on add. This is the tab that gets added. If you remember, when we run talent management dashboard, it shows us these tabs, right? So I can give it a name. I'm saying worker details. I'll go ahead and expand the worklets and click on plus, and I'll go ahead and add my worklet. Are any worklets available right now? No, no worklets are available. So another prerequisite for your worklets is that they should be shared. But at this point in time, because my worklet is not shared with anyone, I cannot go ahead and add them to my dashboard. So I'll have to edit. We'll still not be able to add this to our dashboard because this is a temporary report, but at least I'll show you how that is done. So if you see this statement, it says this is a temporary report and will be deleted. So all because this is a training tenant, all reports that get created are created as temporary. Now in your implementation tenants, in your client tenants, when you create a report, you can specify whether that report would be a temporary report. The advantage is that report is automatically cleared after X number of days. Now here I don't have an option to uncheck it, but in your tenants, you would have the option to either create a temporary report or a normal report, right? Now there's this report, which is called so this is basically a task and we can schedule this task. So when we schedule this task, let's say we want to schedule this task to run on a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis. When we do that, this task would basically check how many reports, how many temporary reports are past their deletion date. So for example, this report will be deleted on December 5th. So when I run this task on December 5th, this particular report would be deleted, right? So the advantage of creating these temporary reports is, right? So it will run in the background if you have the authorization. It will check all the temporary reports which are past due. So it says there are some 9,000 expired temporary reports, right? It will go ahead and delete them. Okay, but here we don't have an option to uncheck that, unfortunately. That's fine. I'm saying share this with all, or let me select some specific security groups. So I want to share this report with HR admins, analysts, auditors, integration admins, and operation admins. Now, when I come to all, if you see this report is available. When I add this report, it will default all those security groups to which this report is shared. Now, as part of the dashboard, then I can say, okay, I don't want this report to be available for these two security groups within the dashboard, right? I can mark this as required and optional, and we'll see what happens when a report is marked as required. It's not relevant for this. So I'll talk in terms of home. As I mentioned, we'll not be able to save this because this is a temporary report, right? But at this point in time, if you go ahead and save it, this will basically add your report to the dashboard, right? If you want, you can add additional tabs. So if you remember with that talent management, there were 2 tabs, right? You can add additional tabs as well. Okay, now, as I mentioned earlier, the home landing page is also a dashboard, right? Which means, so I'll not save it. Obviously, I cannot save it. Which means I can also configure the home landing page. So if I come in here and search for home, you see that this is also a dashboard, a Workday delivered one. So I can go ahead and edit it. And I can add any worklets which are enabled for home. Right? Okay. Now on the home page, I have the option to edit the worklets. So when I click on edit, you'll see some of these worklets I can actually remove. The others I don't have an option to remove. Right? So I can reorder these worklets, but I would not be able to remove some of these worklets. So if I go back to the home, any worklet which is marked as required cannot be deleted. So for example, talent and performance, learning, my team members, right? Talent, learning, my team members. You see, these are all marked as required worklets. The worklet which is marked as required cannot be removed from that dashboard. Right? Any optional worklet can be removed. Similarly, any worklet which is marked as optional can still be added. So you can go ahead and add any worklets. The difference between a home landing page and your normal dashboard is your home landing page can show up to 20 apps. And we already know your other dashboards can show maximum of 6 worklets on any tab. Okay. If you want, you can also relabel. So our report, which is KPMG, we don't want that label to display. I can give a different label here. All right. And finally, if we can also resize. So in the dashboard, if you remember, there was this option called 1x or 2x. So we can go ahead and resize some of the worklets. If I go to talent management, filter, let's run talent management first and edit. Right? So there is this extra tab added. If I want, I can add up to 6 tabs. Right? If I want, I can also delete those tabs. So each tab can have up to 6 worklets, and each dashboard can have up to 6 tabs. Right? So that's what you saw here. The first tab has 6 worklets, and then you click on tab 2. There's some report which is added. Right? This probably that report has some error. Okay. So if I go to the configuration, the default size is 1x. I can go ahead and change the size to 2x. And when I do that, uh, the worklet would be double, right? So it would show on the whole page. Okay. In addition to adding these worklets, what I can also do is I can add these menu items. So these, if you see, are tasks that have been added, create supervisory org. What I can also do is, in addition to adding the worklets, if you see, there is an option called menu, and there is this section called reports, which is what you see here. And under that, I have added 2 tasks. So I can add a new section called, let's say, audits. I can then click on plus, and then I can add any other custom reports or any other tasks. So I want to add a new task. I'll click here. I'll click on create custom allowed worklet tasks. Right? I'll search for a task. So let's say view security group. Right? I can give it a new name. Security roles. Add some description. Okay. And I can still go ahead and add more tasks, more reports based on my requirement. I can add new tabs as well, right? So I can come in here, give it a new name, tab 2. Again, add worklets on this tab, add menu on this tab, and I can also reorder my tabs. So done. And now when I come here, it will allow me to reorder. Right? So I can reorder my tabs, modify them, rename them, again, delete them, and say done. So now when I refresh my dashboard, so there's this new section called audit. I added the task view security group, but I relabeled it. So when I click on it, it actually takes me to that view security group. Okay. Any questions? Right. So if I click on view more, that's when it takes me to the full report, and I can run the ret report and get the output. So on the dashboard, it doesn't show me any prompts. Right? But when I run the report in full mode by clicking on view more, that's when it gets me all the data. So if you see, the actual number of rows are much more, but on the dashboard, it shows me the top 10 or the number of rows that I have configured on the worklet tab. Okay. All right. If there are no questions, there is this another tab that you see, which is called subfilter. Okay, so if you see, there's in addition to filter, there is another tab called subfilter. Now you cannot directly add. So in terms of fields we discussed yesterday, you can add fields on a report from the primary business object as well as related business objects, right? But when it comes to related business objects, you cannot directly include them in filter. So if you want to include any related business objects or fields of, if you want to build a filter using fields from the related business object, then you'll have to do that on the subfilter tab. So let's take an example. Let's say, uh, let's take compensation grade, right? Uh, so compensation grade is a related business object, and it has all these fields. Let me see if something is relevant. Uh, okay, I'm taking compensation packages. Now when I come here, come to filter, if you see, I cannot create a filter on compensation packages, right? So I'll have to go to subfilter, click on add, select the related business object. So what is our related business object? It is compensation grade. So I'll come to subfilter, select compensation grade, right? So from within this related business object, I want to build a filter on compensation packages. So now I'm saying only get me those workers who are assigned to a compensation grade, which is part of, let's say, some ABC package, right? Or which is not part of. So I can now define my filter criteria here. So if you want to build a filter using fields which are part of your related business objects, you'll have to do that in subfilter. Right? Right? And then you can select the relevant package. So you can create your filter in exactly the same way, or you can create your sub filter in exactly the same way as you would do your filter. So all options are available. You can also prompt. If you see, you have all the options here. You can also prompt the value to the end user. So your end user would then enter the compensation package. It will come here, and based on that, your sub filter would work. Right? You can also create sub filters on multiple related business objects. So now you can come in here and add a new business object, related business object, let's say company. Right? And then add or build a filter based on fields in company. Right? And then create your condition. So whenever you are accessing fields, if you see, there is a separate section called global fields. So these are all those fields which are part of global business object. Right? So that's what I said, any field which is built on global business object, and these are usually your text fields, for example, @ hyphen, right? And these are used across globally, right? Or these could be your numbers, or these could be your dates. So always go ahead and create them on your global business object. I don't want some sub filter. I can go ahead and remove it. Okay, one thing to remember, whenever you create a sub filter, you'll have to basically include that business object in the filter as well. So because you have built your sub filter on compensation grade or fields which are part of compensation grade, you'll have to come here to your filter, add a new condition saying compensation grade is not empty. Right? If you don't do that, your sub filter will not work. Similarly, had you added any additional sub filters using any additional business objects, you would have to come here and add all of them to your main filter, saying, for example, company is not empty. Right? If you don't do that, your sub filters would not work. Okay. Any questions? Let's run this report. Okay. So there are no employees who are part of that sub filter, and that's why it doesn't get me any data. All right. Okay, let's stop here.